Hey guys, welcome. My name is Aaron, and in this video, I am going to walk you through thinking about sketching, or just kind of how I approach thinking about a sketch. So, bringing a concept into a visual. So, let's get started. I had an idea today about self care, the thought about maintaining um, a good kind of a good routine and that sort of thing. So I started thinking about, well, what is out there that could potentially communicate this, and I started to think about plants and nature. I have a plant here in my room, and it requires occasionally requires water. So I started thinking about that, just taking elements from anything and everything. So you could think about something that requires maintenance, at like maybe a bike. Maybe you're a biker, and you know uh, maintain your bike that way. There are many things that you could do. There's so many different applications for this concept, but I want to stick to plants. I think that's really interesting. But know that before I get started with sketching the actual concept, I go through this process. Really, most of the time it happens in my head, but sometimes when the concept really needs to get worked through, I like to sketch it out, and I just want to keep an open mind and just play around with the idea of self care, and like seeing oneself as a living entity that needs to be maintained. And okay, so another thought is like maybe like a bathtub. Like, think about a person like in a bubble bath. um, there's so many things that we could sketch to communicate this concept, but like I said before, I'm really interested in plants and nature, and just what nature has to teach us about um, proper care. Thinking about flowers, all kinds of different organic materials, right? So let's see, now that we've sort of decided a direction, which is plants, let's see what can happen when we combine plants and the idea of self-care and uh, us. So one thing that I want to note here is that I'm using a 6B pencil here with the app. The app is called Procreate, for those who don't know. What I've done here is really important and kind of key. It's really useful to think about words, keywords that serve as the constraints before you get started with a sketch, right? We've thought about plants, right? We've decided that plants is a concept we want to explore. We know that we want to do something with self-care, and we know that we want to do something that has to do with how self-care applies to us. It's Sunday today, so there's been a lot of resting involved, a lot of sort of reflection, and so this is the concept that I want to share with people today, mostly as a reminder that you know we we tend to work really hard, and I know people who uh, make it a habit to go to the park and do all kinds of stuff like recreational activities, which is something that I like to remind myself that is part of the process. Part of creating is also resting and recovery. It's like running, right? Running is important, but recovery is also important. So I'm thinking about all of this and thinking about, you know, running and how that is part of sort of like that healthy habit. All right, I'm ranting at this point, so let's get started. We have here all these different, all these different elements, and I'm just having fun here. I'm just thinking about nature. I'm thinking about work. We went through a lot of different ideas here, from the bathtub to the bike, things that we won't be using, but they inform what directions we don't want to take. And that informs our process. So we have our terms, which are very important. So that's step one, right? Deciding what directions to take, what subjects we want to cover. Let's get to the fun part. Well, every step is fun, but you know what I mean. All right, so let's think about how we can take that idea of a plant and expand on it. So I'm thinking about a really nice like pot of ceramic pot, right? And I'm doing like a really rough sketch I don't want it to be perfect. I just want to get my idea across and make sure it communicates. So here I'm just making a very simple flat, it's not complicated, it's more like a thumbnail of a plant pot. Yes, okay. And now I'm making leaves, and here is some leaves. These are just really rough. Also remember that okay, so this is our plant, right? And we started to think about self-care. So that self-care makes me think about watering plants, right? Like a little pitcher for watering. I don't know where that'll go, but and then the idea of us as people. I always think about the mind as a garden and as a place for growth, and I always think about how like reading is one way to bring sunlight and bring water to our mental garden, if you will. So I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about how do I combine these three, right? And this is where creativity is, it can flourish. But by making these constraints very clear to us, we're able to start blending it. So let's look at this. All right, let's start playing around. There's no rules here. What I'm starting to think, what if a person could grow, right? As a plant. And I'm also thinking like what if the person is like watering themselves, right? It's gonna be kind of hard for them to do, right? But this is what the creative process is all about. It's just like, this is kind of messy, right? But it's just about experimentation and playing around with concepts. This is so funny. I'm thinking this would be such a hard act to do. It's just like sprinkle water over oneself like this in such a way. But it's like there's something here, definitely. Here I have my person. I'm going to make this, I'm using an eraser here to kind of refine this idea a little bit. But my little person is watering themselves in an act of self-care. By taking these terms, they've given us visuals, us as people. They've given us visuals, right? And we've turned these visuals into elements, and we've started to combine. And that's what creativity is. We're just combining things. We're just trying things. And the mindset is, don't be judgmental with what you have. Just let it come and let it flow. Sometimes the mind auto generates judgment when we're sketching, and that's a big no-no, especially when you're trying to be creative and you're trying to bring about something new. You have to be very, very cautious about judging too soon. So here I want to think about what if my person is sort of standing in such a way where there is sort of like I'm thinking about them like kind of holding on to like leaves in this way, almost like a tree, if you will. So what I'm doing here is just playing with the idea of a person being a plant. And the way I'm approaching this person is very abstract. If you can tell, this is basically a stick figure. There's no indication of it being like a really elaborate human being. It's just a fun way to interpret a human. So you can do that in any style that you want. In an effort to add some depth to this, I'm going to start thinking about that pot in perspective. I'm going to add a little bit of perspective to it. So what I did here is just kind of imagine myself looking not at the plant pot from a straight angle, but more like this, right? So my eye is looking at the pot from this angle right here. So that's how I'm approaching adding that perspective to the plant pot. For those of you who haven't explored perspective, I encourage you to first start with drawing objects flat and gradually going into perspective, because adding perspective to elements and to objects is another thing of it in of its own. So don't get discouraged if at first you don't get it, because it's process. It's like a muscle. It takes time for you to be able to think about this on the go and on the fly. It takes actually a little, I mean, it takes practice. Some people can do it naturally and others can't. The point is try to do it as much as you can, and you'll eventually get better. And don't be discouraged if you don't get it right away. Some people just have the ability to think visually, just the same way some people are pitch perfect and can think about music and sing naturally. It's just the way the brain is wired. But you can always learn. So here I'm really liking this idea of a person sort of being a plant. I want to add a little bit of color here. Not color, but a little bit of shading is what I mean. I'm using a old bleach brush that I really like. And I want to lower the opacity from my previous drawing and sort of go away from it. It's still there in case I need it. But in this, at this moment, we're on our second iteration. And we may decide that we need a third iteration. But I think that I'm pretty satisfied with where we're at here. I'm making a group for our second iteration, and we'll call it that. So we'll do V2, all right? Yeah, try to be organized with your layers, because it's very easy to be confused as to where everything is. And we want to make our lives easier, not harder. So let's see in what ways we can refine this. So I'm adding a little bit more shading here. We started with defining what we wanted to draw. So define your constraints. So that's step one. That's deciding what terms you want to use to begin your journey, your sketch journey. And then we started to draw draw elements. So these terms produced elements. We started to draw them. Then we combined them with each other. And then we did our first iteration. Then we're doing our second iteration, and so on. Eventually, we're gonna get to the final result, which is going to be the result of all of this work and all of this thinking. Everyone approaches sketching differently. This is just my approach to making a sketch like this or an illustration. This here is the recipe. This right here is the recipe. Take it and do with it whatever it is that well, this combination here is just, it's magical. It'll help you produce things that you wouldn't have imagined before. So that's what gets me really excited about just sitting down and starting to think about a sketch. All right, enough of that. Let's get back. And let's add a little bit of detail. What do you guys think? Should I add a little bit of personality to this figure? I think I should, just because I like figures with little faces or with some sort of face. Sometimes, at least. It might be tiny, but it might work. No, that's not working. I'm thinking maybe it needs like a little bit. So you just have to try things, right? So here at this point, I'm just trying things. And I may not need to add too much detail. But I kind of want to add a little bit of detail. Since this is a low resolution post, that's why you're seeing so many pixels. But I just want to share with you the thinking, so we're not really too worried about getting a high resolution sketch. The idea is what matters here. The process. Trust the process. Always. If you can, try to remember that every day. So, okay. We went through the process of how to create a sketch from an idea to an actual thing, so we should be proud of ourselves. Whoops. Oh no, I need to undo. Cool. So there you have it. We've gone through the process of creating a illustration. I hope this helped, and until next time.